Good evening. Welcome to Bible study here at Christ Church in Bowling Green. Most of you know me. My name is Keith. I got Bill and Doug with me here today, and I'm doing Bible Talk Live, so I hope you like it.
It feels like Bible Talk Live, doesn't it?
It's a lot more fun that way. I enjoy doing it. It's kind of exciting for me. So I am excited, actually, to have you all with us tonight. We're going to be taking questions. I actually have them in front of me, hopefully. So if you say them, I'll be able to type them in there. I'll be able to see them. I apologize for last week, Doug. Good gracious. I think there were people that had questions, and Ty was over there struggling to get my attention, and I was so focused on what we were doing, I didn't pay any attention.
Well, it's easy to do. I mean, this is kind of a new format now where we're trying to pay attention to you as well as pay attention to each other. With Bible Talk, Bill, we only have to pay attention to each other.
That's right. And now people get to see us, which is not always that good. So
No, it isn't. It isn't. And I brought my scratcher. I apologize to whoever was upset that I was scratching my face. It is such a bad habit, but I brought my scratcher with me so that I don't have to use my hand today. But we're going to be in Matthew this morning. See, I'm on Bible Talk Live again. We're going to be in Matthew chapter 26. We're going to be looking at verses 36 through 46. And before we do that, though, Doug, I think we're going to do something a little different tonight to get us started.
Yeah, we've been blessed. Mark Hathaway, who has blessed us in times past with each service Mark has put together a video on Jesus' prayer in the garden. And so we're going to start off tonight by letting you see that. We're excited to let you see that and to hear what he's put together. We're going to play that for you, and that will kind of help set the stage for what we're going to talk about when we dive into the Scripture itself. So we are pleased to let you listen to what Mark has put together, and hopefully, if everything works out well, we'll be able to put it on Facebook tomorrow as well. And so if you hear it and like it, and I believe you will, then you'll be able to direct other people to it as well. So that they can see it and hear it also. And Ty, if you're ready, we'll let you go ahead and.
Prayer is an incredible thing. It's a form of communication, a place of comfort, a source of compassion, an opportunity to be grateful, as well as a time to ask for forgiveness. It's all of those things and so much more. And it's open to everyone. For those who believe in God, for those who don't believe, and for those who don't know what they believe. This is the creation of Adam. It is considered one of the most incredible works of art in all of history. It's found on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel in Rome, and it was painted by none other than Michelangelo. It evokes many emotions, but for me, it reminds me of that concept of prayer we were just talking about. What this painting depicts is a scene from Genesis. And what it shows is that since the beginning, God has wanted a relationship with humanity, with us, with you, with me. Now, I don't remember where, but I once heard a description of this painting that I think is so true. It shows God as stretching out, desperately seeking to connect with Adam, with humanity. The angels are trying to hold God back from falling out of heaven itself. Well, on earth, Adam can barely lift a finger to reach out to his heavenly Father. How human, how me. But in fact, God wanted a relationship with us so much that come down from heaven, He did. And no place better illustrates this than in the person of Jesus of Nazareth. His is a story found not only in the Gospels, but rooted in the fabric of human history. He lived life among us. He laughed, He cried, He became tired and slept. When He was hungry, He ate. He became thirsty, He drank. He implored people to love one another. He fought injustice. He faced persecution and paid for his ideals, his faith, his purpose with his life. For followers of Jesus, we believe and hold in our hearts that he was more than a mere human being. He was and is God, the creator of all that there is. And because he and the Father are one, which I know sounds kind of churchy, but what that means is that through Jesus, God became human, separating himself from the majesty of being divine to experience life as one of us. And while he taught us how to pray with the Lord's Prayer, I believe he also demonstrated the true power of prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane. While all 4 Gospels in the Bible reference Jesus and a prayer after the Last Supper, we're going to focus primarily on the words found in the book of Mark. They went to the olive grove called Gethsemane, and Jesus said, "Sit here while I go and pray." He took Peter, James, and John with him, and he became deeply troubled and distressed. He told them, "My soul is crushed with grief to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me." Have you ever shared with your dearest friends like Jesus did with Peter, James, and John, a time in your life where you were troubled, a time in your life where you were distressed? Have you ever been crushed with grief to the point where life itself seems almost impossible? If you haven't, I'm sorry to say you will. Can you relate? Jesus can. He went on a little farther and fell to the ground. He prayed that if it were possible, the awful hour awaiting him might pass him by. "Abba, Father," he cried out, "everything is possible for you. Please take this cup of suffering away from me. Yet I want your will to be done, not mine." Have you ever dreaded a time where you had to face something you didn't want to face? Found it so difficult you couldn't walk or even stand? Begged for someone, for God to help you face it? Have you ever cried out, "Please, please, no, no, don't let this be true. Please don't let this happen. Please, someone help me"? Has that ever been you? I know it's been me. And here, it was Jesus. Then he returned and found the disciples asleep. He said to Peter, "Simon, are you asleep? Couldn't you watch with me even 1 hour? Keep watch and pray so that you will not give in to temptation. For the spirit is willing, but the body is weak." Have you ever been let down, depended on someone and they couldn't or wouldn't step up? The heart was there, but the follow-through just wasn't. Have you ever been the person who failed? Failed someone who trusts you? Failed someone who loves you? Jesus knows people like that. Yet he loved them then like he loves us now. Then Jesus left them again and prayed the same prayer as before. "Abba, Father, everything is possible for you. Please take this cup of suffering away from me. Yet I want your will to be done, not mine." When he returned to them again, he found them sleeping, for they couldn't keep their eyes open. and they didn't know what to say. When he returned to them the third time, he said, "Go ahead and sleep. Have your rest." But no, the time has come. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Up. Let's be going. Look, my betrayer is here. It all happened in a place called Gethsemane, a real place you can visit today, just outside the city of Jerusalem. In fact, people still go there to pray. It was there Jesus fully accepted his fate. I sense no fear, no doubt, nothing but determination in Jesus' words as he says, "The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Up, let's be going. Look, my betrayer is here." From this point on, Jesus faces abandonment, accusation, ridicule, brutality, and crucifixion. But then on the third day, resurrection. And because of the empty tomb, we all have been given the right to become children of God. All we have to do is ask. Anytime, anywhere, we can close our eyes and express to God, the creator of all that there is, our Heavenly Father, all of our questions, our doubts, our fears, as well as all of our happiness, our hopes, and our dreams. Because not only does he love us, he knows. He knows the highest peaks and the deepest valleys of what it's like to be one of us, to be human. Since the beginning, God has been reaching out to us, asking us to share life with him. And each of us, in turn, no matter where we find ourselves in life, sooner or later, we'll have to ask, what do I choose to believe? Your choice, your free will to choose. What do I truly believe about all of this? My life, this existence, my mistakes, my opportunity for forgiveness, my purpose, and my relationship with God. The answers to all of that can begin for each of us through the incredible gift and privilege of prayer. And it's okay to be honest. It's okay to be honest in prayer. God can take it. And I'd like to believe that wherever we're at on this journey of life, God knows our hearts. So no matter who you are, where you find yourself, what you believe or don't believe, when the time is right, take a moment, find a quiet place, and just say, "Dear God," and let the honest conversation begin. Prayer is an incredible thing.
Well, guys, let me first say, Mark is one talented fellow.
Powerful.
Did an amazing job there, and Bill, I got to tell you, really makes you stop and think about what we're going to be looking at tonight as we're starting to get to the scripture this evening and start talking about Jesus at Gethsemane. That was a really powerful statement by Mark.
Well, it really was, and I was very touched by it. And it really says something about Jesus. We were talking before the class, and one of the things I said was that I have more trouble understanding his humanity than his divinity. He was fully human, Doug, and I struggle with that. I've sort of always wanted to see him as some kind of superhuman hero, like with Superman and Batman and the Green Lantern all combined. But it's really not like that. He is fully God and he is fully man. Yeah. And we have to come to grips with that. The reality was this passage probably expresses his humanity better than any other that I know of.
Yes. He's often known as the Son of God, and he is, which talks about his deity, that he is God come in the flesh. He is also called the Son of Man. Both those titles are his.
Yes.
And what we're seeing in the garden scene is we're seeing Jesus as the Son of Man. We're seeing his humanity. And Keith, when we think about God, it's hard for us to relate to God. God never gets tired. God is never sore. He's never without power. He's got endless amounts of power. There's nothing he can't do. He's capable of anything he wants. He's not limited. He's without limit. We have all of these great words that we use to describe God and his majesty and how powerful. He's all powerful. He's all knowing. He's everywhere at one time. We use all of these kind of adjectives and that to describe who God is. It's hard for me to relate to that, but I can relate to Jesus. And the reason I can relate to Jesus is because of his humanity. It's his humanity that stands out to us. He was thirsty. He was tired. He was sleepy. He can be cut and bleed. He knows what it's like to be tempted in all points, just as we, yet without sin. We can relate to Jesus because he's human.
Yeah, one of the things that I always think about with regards to Paul, just to shift gear for a second, is that he made a statement somewhere, I don't remember exactly where it was, but he made a statement of trying to be all things to all people. And one of the things that's really interesting about Gethsemane and all of this and the person of Jesus really is the idea of just how badly God wanted to be my friend. How bad he wanted to have a relationship with me and with all of you, because he came here as a baby. He came here defenseless, he couldn't do anything for himself. He was born of the Virgin Mary. He lived this life on this earth, Bill, and what's amazing about it is in all of his life, from a young child, he was always about his Father's business. And when he comes to the garden and he begins to pray, and we start looking at this passage, which I'm going to read here in just a moment, we begin to see and to realize just how amazing that really is. So I'm gonna get us into the study here. Matthew 26. I'm going to be reading from the New Living Translation, and I'm going to begin in verse 36. He says, "Then Jesus went with them to the olive grove called Gethsemane, and he said, 'Sit here while I go over there to pray.' He took Peter and Zebedee's 2 sons, James and John, and he became anguished and distressed. He told them, 'My soul is crushed with grief to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me.' He went on a little farther and bowed with his face to the ground, praying, 'My Father, if it is possible, let this cup of suffering be taken from me. Yet I want your will to be done, not mine.' Then he returned," verse 40, "to the disciples and found them asleep. He said to Peter, 'Couldn't you watch with me even 1 hour? Keep watch and pray so that you will not give in to temptation, for the spirit is willing, but the body is weak.' Then Jesus left them a second time and prayed, 'My Father, if this cup cannot be taken away unless I drink it, your will be done.' When he returned to them again, he found them sleeping, for they couldn't keep their eyes open. So he went to pray a third time, saying the same thing again. Then he came to the disciples and said, 'Go ahead and sleep, have your rest. But look, the time has come. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Up, let's be going. Look, my betrayer is here.'" We talked a little bit about his humanity, Doug, and I'm just kind of looking over my notes here. One of the things we talked about was this prayer, the times that he's praying there, and and talked about it and defined it in prayer, supplication, and submission. And so I spent some time, reading over that a little bit and just getting an understanding. And I think it's important to truly understand what those words are that you've penned here. The idea of supplication, at least in the definition I found, was the action of asking or begging for something earnestly or humbly. And when I looked up the word earnestly, it said sincere and intense conviction. And when I think about what Jesus is praying in the garden here, Bill and Doug, and he gets to that point where he says, I really don't want to have to do this if you don't need me to do it. But the reality is I want your will to be done and not mine. That sense of just that intense conviction that he has in what he knows is his role, what he's here for. I find that amazing to think through that and think through all of what's going on in his mind. Mark's video did a great job of just asking that question several times. But what do you think was going through his mind, outside of the fact that he knew what was impending, right? But what were all the other things that were going through his mind, do you think, at that time?
Well, he talks about the cup, and I think this cup had a lot of ingredients. When you stop and think about what he's going through, he's being rejected completely and totally. The very people, Keith, who should have protected him, his own people, his own government, didn't protect him. They are the ones who are leading this charge to see him dead. They want him dead. Nothing else will matter. The Roman government should have stepped in and said, no, we're not going to do this. It's illegal. It's wrong. And that night, he's been up since morning. This is Thursday night. He has been up since morning. And by the time he actually dies, it's going to be 36, 38 hours. And he's going to go through at least 6 illegal trials. Illegal. Neither the Roman government nor the Jewish government was allowed to have trials at night for the very reason that people would not be railroaded. And yet he's going through that. So these people who run the government, who should have protected him, didn't. But it's even worse than that, because the very people who the previous Sunday had ushered him into Jerusalem as a king, and they're the ones who are telling their kids, look, that's Jesus. He's going to save our people. By the time we get to Friday, they're calling for his death and the release of a revolutionary named Barabbas. Mm-hmm. And not only that, Doug, but that very night, he's getting ready to be betrayed by Jesus. He knew that was coming. He's getting ready. He's going to be betrayed by Peter, because Peter's going to deny knowing him as he goes through these trials overnight. But Luke says that all of them fled and left him. So they're all going to be gone. They're heartbroken. They're afraid beyond imagination. So I think it's not only the death, and death by crucifixion was the most horrid thing you can imagine. It was meant to be torturous. Yes. We have had many ways that we have put people to death in our country, including hanging and firing squad early on, and then the gas chamber, an electric chair, and now most states are using the hypodermic needle with chemicals that will put someone to death. But the thing that is alike about all of those, as opposed to death by crucifixion, was that they were all designed to be quick, not to be torturous. The Roman cross was one of the most hideous ways in history of devising a way to kill a human being, a man generally. And they did that in order to say, it was a deterrent. You do what this guy did and you'll get what this guy got. And it was a deterrent. Yeah. And so, Doug, I think all of those things, I don't think it was any one particular thing, but I think all of those things are really in this cup. He is, at this moment in time, he is struggling mightily because of those things and maybe more.
Yeah, we call it the cup of suffering, and under that heading of suffering, like you've said, there are lots of things that are there. There is the physical suffering that he's going to go through. It is going to be horrendous pain. It's going to be a time where he's going to lose control of his body.
Yeah.
In the whole thought process of that, Jesus, one thing, he's been in control.
Yeah.
Now he's giving that control over.
Yeah. And many, Doug, just to throw it in here, and I'll
Yeah,
turn it right
go
back
on.
to you, but many of these people who were headed for crucifixion died before they ever got there. The beatings were so severe
Yeah.
that they died during the beatings.
Yeah, and he was beat brutally.
Yes.
And so we've got this physical thing. Then we've got all the mental things that's going on. And I don't want you to think for a moment that the devil has quit playing with him, because he hasn't. Through this whole scene, through everything that's going on, think about it. He trusted in God. Let him come and save him now if he'll have him. You know, all of this stuff that's going on, the devil is still attacking him. This is not only suffering from a physical standpoint, it's suffering from a mental standpoint, it's suffering from a spiritual standpoint. He's having to wrestle with all of this kind of stuff. And I want you to know, the cross is won or lost in the garden. This is where he wins.
That's true.
It's on this praying field that he's on right now, where he's there before the Father, prostrate on the ground before the Father, and he's praying. This is where the cross is won, is here. And so you've got all of these things. It's spiritual. You've got what you have said. His friends are forsaking him.
Yes.
You know, Jesus was a man who had spent his life for others, and they're all going to leave him. I mean, you would begin to feel like, what was it all for? You know, it's like the one preacher said, last Sunday I had 17 responses. Well, good. No, they all got up and left. You know, in Jesus' case, they got up and left. And they left him alone. They fled from him, and so he has to deal with that. The humiliation that he had to deal with. It's quite possible that he was naked.
Yes.
On that cross.
Yes.
It was not only a brutal death; it was a humiliating death that he was going to have to go through. And Bill, and I'll throw it back over to you on this one. It was all for something he didn't do. It's one thing to suffer for something when you're guilty. It's another thing to suffer when you've done nothing wrong.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And we've seen that. I mean, we've seen that in history. We see it still today. People who have been wrongly accused. And DNA has exonerated many who were accused wrongly and then convicted wrongly. And many of them have spent 10, 15, 20, 25 years in prison. And sometimes they come out bitter, and you understand that.
Yeah.
That the whole system turned against them. The whole system, they feel, did not work. And yet we have a man here who has been, and this is the one way he is different from us. I mean, when we think about Jesus, one of the great things about him is he is like us in every way. Every way. He has been tempted, and you noted all the different ways he is. His human body got tired, he got thirsty, he got hungry, all of those things that we go through in that way. Losing people that he loved to death. All of that has been part of his life as well. And so he was like us in every way except one. And that was, he had done no wrong. He had committed no sin. He had not violated God's law a single time in his life. And whenever they accused him of doing it, and they did often, he pointed out that he hadn't done it. He had violated their rules, but he had never violated the law of God. And so here is, I remember my dad saying to me one time, I was upset because a teacher accused me of something. And I went home, and in those days, I'm going to tell you, parents, in my day, parents stood on the side of the teacher. They weren't going to go against the teacher.
You got a spanking at school. You got one when you got home.
I'm telling you, he was ticked off. And I remember him saying to me, he said, you may not have done it this time, but he said the punishment you got was for all the times you got away with it.
There
And I
was
had to
truth.
think about that.
There was truth in that, wasn't
Oh,
there?
that was truth. It was brutal.
Yeah.
And I had to think about it for a while, but he was right. I had gotten away with many things.
Yeah.
So here I got accused of one thing I didn't do. It's like, too bad. Here's a man that was truly innocent in every way that a man could be innocent.
Yeah.
And yet here he is. I don't know. I mean, when he gets on the cross, he says, Father, forgive them. That touches me deeply.
Yeah.
How could these are the people who put him there?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know why this came to mind, but you've probably seen Bruce Almighty and Evan Almighty and those types of movies, essentially where, God says, well, you think you can do a better job, then you do it, essentially. So as you were talking about trying to wrestle with Jesus' humanity, Bill, I was thinking about how great of a challenge it was for him and his divinity, and what kind of stress that put on his flesh, on his humanity. He knew what was going to happen. We go back, we talk about, he wrote the Old Testament, right? He was there. He knew. He understands the Psalms. He understands Isaiah. He knows Joel. He knows all of those things are going to happen. He knows he knows what's going to happen as he prepares to be betrayed and go with the Roman guards.
Yes.
He's already aware. So
Yeah, very
how do
much
you think
aware.
that?
Yeah.
How do you think, as I was asking that question, like, what do you think he's thinking and how's he feeling as he's praying to God and asking, if I don't have to do it? Look, I know what's going to happen. I know, without really knowing, I know what's going to happen when they hit me with that cat of nine tails.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know what that's going to feel like on my flesh yet because I haven't had it happen.
Yeah.
But he has a pretty good sense of it. And I feel like, one scripture talked about him sweating as though it was drops of blood. I feel like the pressure that was going on in his mind mentally was far greater probably at that time than what ended up happening physically, because I have to believe at some point, I know when I beat myself up in the gym, at some point I'm just numb. I can't feel. You used to laugh at me all the time about the story when we were on vacation the one time, and I had T-Rex arms. I couldn't move my arms; they were like stuck here because I had done arms for so long that day. So that mental anguish that he was going through at that time, and that idea of anguish, that severe mental or physical pain or suffering, and all that distress, all the anxiety and everything going
Let me
along
throw
with that.
one thought in there, and I'll let Bill elaborate a little bit on it too. It's one thing if you're on the cross and you can't do anything about it. Another temptation that he had was he could have done something about it.
Yeah.
He told us that he could have called 10,000 angels to his aid. What kind of a temptation would that be if you really had the power to change things?
Yeah, I'm going to tell you, I would have seen the whip, and I would have done that immediately.
Yeah.
It would not have taken me long to say, I'm not putting up with this.
That's right.
But you're right, Keith. There's a mental anguish here, and there's also physical anguish. I mean, you quoted Luke. He describes it as sweat falling to the ground, like great drops of blood. And I was reading a thing, it may have been today, maybe it was yesterday, where a guy was giving you all the medical reasons why it was blood. But that's not what Luke says. Luke said it was like great drops of blood. And so I think this mental anguish turns into a real physical anguish for him. And everybody was aware of the Roman cross. Everybody was aware of what it meant and what they did and how horrifying it was. And you add to that, Doug, the betrayal that he felt from everybody who should have been there, everybody who should have, from the government on down, to protect him. And you see an anguish. And I believe, and I don't know if you agree or not, Doug, but I think what we have here is a condensed version. He didn't walk out into the garden, and I think it's Luke that describes it as being a stone's throw, so maybe 50, 60 feet, something like that, and get down on his knees, fall to his face, and pray a line, and then walk back.
Exactly.
And these guys had time to go to sleep. I think he prayed for some time. I think this thing probably went on, possibly, Doug, for several hours, where he has gone out, where he has prayed and prayed and prayed, maybe for 40 or 50 minutes or an hour or more each time he goes.
Agreed.
And I think it's like that because, man, he is anguishing over about all of over what is about to happen to him, and I think the reality of taking upon himself the sins of the world is weight bearing on him.
Yeah, I'm actually looking at that passage. It's in Luke chapter 22. Luke chapter 22, and it's good to have the synoptic gospels that we can look at Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and see those different yet similar accounts of what has transpired. Dr. Luke, being a doctor, kind of looks at things sometimes a little differently than others. He says in verse 39, "And coming out, he went to the Mount of Olives, as he was accustomed." That's important to note. This is a place that he went to often for prayer, and that this was his custom to do that.
Well, and let me add that he was on the Mount of Olives often. I mean, his Olivet discourse over Jerusalem was from the Mount of Olives. It has a long history in Israel, but he also traveled through the Mount of Olives, heading to Bethany. During this final week of life, that's where they have been headquartered, is in Bethany with Lazarus and his sisters. And so this is on the way. But it was a very, very important place to him.
Yeah, and it was his custom to go there, which meant Judas would know where he was.
Yes.
In all of this. It says, when he came to the place, he said to them, "Pray that you may not enter into temptation." And he was withdrawn from them about a stone's throw, and he knelt down and prayed, saying, "Father, if it is your will, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done." Now, I want to pay attention to verse 43 because Luke's the only one that tells us this. Luke says, "Then an angel appeared to him from heaven to strengthen him." So what does that mean? Well, that means what we were talking about, that he is in anguish, that he is in despair, that in this prayer, this is not, Father, lay me down to sleep. Now I pray my soul the Lord to keep, or something like that. This is not this kind of prayer. This is an anguish before the Father, pouring your heart out, sweating through this to the point that you're exhausted, that God, Bill, has to send an angel to strengthen you.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And when you think about it, we talked a little bit about this from Luke, Psalm 22 last week. The reality that none of us believe that God abandoned him. And over you see this. You see God, the temptations. At the end of that, what does he do? Well, he does the very same thing. He sends an angel. He strengthens him. And he's doing that during this awful, awful time when he is agonizing over what is about to happen. You see God intervene.
That's right.
And send something to help him. And that was an angel in this case. I'm like you. I love that from Luke because it really adds a dimension to the story that we need to hear. And I want to agree with Keith on this too. And that is that when we are struggling mightily with something, we need to go to God and we need to pray from the heart.
Yeah.
And we need to let God know where we are and what's going on. And I'm telling you, God will strengthen us when we do that, Keith.
Well, I'm going to butt in.
Butt in.
And
No.
I've got a mic.
All right,
I'm
so
not
we-
in front of the camera, so it's kind of nice.
That's
Go
okay.
ahead.
Nobody wants to see you.
Yeah, that's kind of what I figured. Got a face for radio, so I'll stay behind the camera. But I do want to chime in. I do want to make a couple of notes for those of you out there who are listening or watching, that you can find the study notes and follow along with where we're going.
That's right.
You can find those on the website. There's a link on the website to those directly, and there's also in the description of the video here, you can find those study notes. So if you're kind of wondering where we're going and where we're following along, you can follow along with us there. So I just wanted to put that out there and let everybody know, and also that we're interacting with you. So we're watching. Keith and I are both trying to watch and interact with you guys on there. So leave your comments and we'll keep in touch with that. All right, back to you guys.
All right.
Thank you, Tyler.
Let me sneak something in here, Keith.
No.
I know you've probably got something you want to say, but I really appreciate William Barclay. He writes, "This is a passage we almost fear to read, for it seems to intrude into the private agony of Jesus. Surely this is a passage which we must approach upon our knees. Here, study should pass into wondering adoration, he says. I agree with him completely. Bill, it's almost as if we have been allowed into the mind of Jesus, into the prayer of Jesus, a place where we shouldn't be. It's like this should be forbidden for us to be there, and He's opened up the curtain into the soul of Jesus, and He's allowed us into somewhere where we feel like we shouldn't tread, and be careful in, Keith, that we're on holy ground.
Yeah, to kind of in response to both of that, this scripture, as I was reading through it, I always kind of equate it to the idea that God never dumbs the system down. This is where the bar is, and if you're not there yet, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to change that because of what you may be going through or what your decisions are or what you might want to do. And I feel like he does that in everything, and I think that Jesus is showing that here. He's not dumbing down the system. We have to understand that even in this, and really Luke really kind of points that out to us, right? Because he sends an angel of the Lord there to strengthen him. God knows that his bar is high, right, Bill? That's a reality, and so because we're here, he knows that the only way you're going to get to that bar he set is through him. You're only going to get there if you trust in him and you realize that. And so this idea that Jesus was forsaken in the garden or on the cross by his Father simply just doesn't play out. It's not borne by anything. He says in John chapter 12, verse 27, he says, now my soul is deeply troubled. Should I pray, Father, save me from this hour? But this is the very reason that I came. Father, bring glory to your name. He recognizes that this is why he's here. It doesn't make it any easier, right? I mean, this is distressful. This is a terrible thing that's going to happen to him. But he realizes that's why he's here, Bill.
Well, he does, and he really relates that to us. And I agree with William Barclay. I mean, I love William Barclay because he's concise and to the point, and he's not wordy. But he sees things, and you're right. I mean, you almost feel like a voyeur at this moment. You almost want to kind of turn your head and kind of walk away a little bit and leave him alone, and realize that he is in deep distress, and not. But if we do, we miss something.
That's right.
I like something the Hebrew writer said. He said, while Jesus was here on earth, he offered prayers and pleadings with a loud cry and tears to the one who could rescue him from death, and God heard his prayers because of his deep reverence for God. Yeah. Man, I just love that because it tells us why we plead to God. God has the answers. He is the only one who can rescue us. He is the only one that can bring this thing that I'm going through to an end. And he does it, Doug, in some of the most amazing ways. When I look back for Sherry and I, it is amazing to me how God worked in our lives and how he brought things about in ways that we never imagined. How we thought about, well, God do this or God do that, and all of a sudden God does something that is entirely different than what we imagined. And, and so here's Jesus who understands what he's about to undergo, and yet he is going to ultimately trust God in all of it.
Yeah, and the Hebrew writer gives us divine inspiration here. He gives us divine understanding that Jesus' prayer was heard and answered. See, this is something sometimes we look at this passage and go,
right.
Well, the Father never answered his prayer. Yes, the Father did answer his prayer.
Yeah, he did.
We'll see that a little bit later here, but the prayer is answered. And it's important for us to understand that. Gethsemane, as we know, it means the idea of oil press, and it's the idea of squishing those olives, and I believe it's from the seed that the oil actually comes from inside. And so they have to be crushed. They have to be pressed together. And you really, I mean, what more appropriate place for this to take place than there? because you kind of get that same idea with this.
Yeah, when you look back at history, that's where Solomon, after he built the temple and began to move away from God, that's where he built the first high place because of the foreign wives that he had, and they worshiped foreign gods first there. It's where David ran when he was running from Absalom, his son. I mean, he was heartbroken. But he became fearful. He took people with him. They ran across the Kidron Valley, and they ran to the Mount of Olives. And as I said before, it was from this vantage point on the Mount of Olives that Jesus talked about Jerusalem and the ultimate fall of Jerusalem in Matthew chapter 24. And so it just has that storied history.
It does.
And it was a place where he loved to go. He felt good about being there. And I don't know, a lot of us, when things are really tough, we're going to God. There are certain places we like to go. We like to go to be alone with God. And so, we may be able to relate to the very fact that he headed to a place that he knew and felt good about.
Yeah, and Keith, I want us to understand some things about this because I agree with what Bill said just a little bit ago, and that was that we are allowed into this private prayer of Jesus for a reason. And the reason that we're allowed into this private prayer is that Jesus is our example. If we're going to win in the battles in the garden of our lives, when we're in Gethsemane, if we're going to have victory in those times, then we're going to have to follow what Jesus did. He becomes our example to us of how to be victorious in the most difficult times of life.
Yeah, if we're just following along in your notes with us, one of the things we need to remember is just how much Jesus desired the fellowship in his final hours. I'm mindful of the fact that he took Peter, James, and John with him. He could have certainly just gone to the garden by himself.
That's right.
One of the things that we as Christians recognize is really important is each other, right? I mean, God didn't create the assembly for him. He created it for us.
That's
we
right.
all know that. And it's important, as you were talking earlier, this time frame of the 39 hours, whatever that was. I wonder how many hours it was in the garden. Certainly, he didn't show Peter, James, and John. You sit here. I'm going to go over here, stone's throw, and I'll be back in a couple minutes. And it only took about 15 minutes. My guess is he was probably there, all of them, in that garden for several hours. I would imagine that's why they fell asleep.
Yeah, I think it's a significant amount
because
of time.
he was praying for so long. And, what were those conversations he was having with his disciples? What kind of conversations would we have, if we were faced with difficult circumstances and looking for some sort of
I will
resolution?
tell you, Keith, for those guys, he had just told them that one of them was going to betray him. They were devastated. Luke says that they were asleep because of sorrow.
Yes.
They cried themselves to sleep. They were messed up. I'm telling you, Jesus has always been in control. He's always known what to do. He's always known what to say. And now Jesus looks at them, and Bill, he says, I am troubled. I'm troubled to the point that I want to die.
Yeah, these three men are going to become significant leaders in this newly formed church, which is only a few weeks out. I mean, they're getting close to that time that the church is going to be established. And they're going to be significant leaders. They need to see this. They need to hear it. So I'm grateful, too, that he took these three with him as he went into the garden to pray. And one of the things that I thought about, Doug, as I looked at this, was the reality that it really calls upon us to hate the very sin that caused the agony that he's about to go through.
Yeah.
I mean, before I mention all the other people, and I think you mentioned this before, all the other things that are in that cup, but I'm in that cup.
That's right.
I mean, the very reality that he died for me, that he took the sin that was due me, and all of that ought to cause me to hate the very sin that caused him to go to the cross. And so I think this is a Jesus that took on himself the burden of the world, and part of that burden was me.
Yeah, I think this is, as I look at this is a doorway into the heart of Christ. Jesus reveals for us his deep struggle that he's having right now. He's asking God to remove the cup, yet the whole time he's surrendering. He's not trying to do something against God's will, but he's trying to find if there's any way he can be obedient and find a different avenue. Is there anything else here? And he's struggling with it, and he's wrestling with it, and we've been given a doorway into that. I'm going to tell you what I believe one of his struggles was, one of his, I'll say part of the cup of suffering. We've been talking about the different ingredients of that cup. I want to tell you one of the things that I think he struggled with was the fact he was struggling. He's coming to this point and he's struggling with it. I think in the midst of this, it bothers him that it bothers him. Have you ever been there where you know what the right thing to do is, but it bothers you in the right thing to do? And it bothers you that it bothers you. It shouldn't bother me. I don't know how many times I've said this, especially Annette and I on our last trip we were on when we went out west. I said, I can't believe how I'm not over this type of stuff, that I ought to be better than this by now. What is the matter with me that I keep losing my cool with people? Why do I continue to be angry with my wife? It's like, what? It bothered me, Bill, that it bothered me still.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And really, this is the first great struggle that he's had. I mean, you look back, there have been other things. He wept at the death of Lazarus.
Yeah.
And you see different times, you see some of his emotion come out.
Yeah.
But this is the first really great struggle. And I think it's probably been building. I mean, as he gets closer to this event, I mean, before he's telling them, my time is not yet. They try to trap him, but his time was not yet.
That's right.
They try to find a way to kill him, but his time was not yet. And yet at this point, he realizes he is only hours away. I think this week, this Passion Week, has been tremendously difficult for him as he has thought about this every single day, what is about to happen. And I think it's led up to this point. But you're right, I've been there, bothered by the reality that something bothers me, that maybe it shouldn't bother me. Why am I bothered by this? And maybe he does feel some of that. Maybe he feels, as the Son of God, is the part of him that is divine, that he shouldn't be bothered by it. But I tell you what, I'm just grateful because you see his humanity shine here. And you see what it's like. Here's what I love about it. He understands the human condition. He understands what we're going through, Keith.
Yes.
He understands what it means to struggle with something in life that is so great, you don't know where to go or what to do with it.
Yeah, and here's the thing, right? I mean, most of us, when we're dealing with those things, we're looking for those who can go alongside us and experience it with us. He realizes right now, there is no way that the three of you who are in this garden with me that I want to spend some time with right now, I want to make sure that you know that I love you, that I care about you, and that things are going to happen, but everything's going to be okay. But you can't go to the cross with me. You can't be up there with me. You can't experience the terrible things that are going to happen to me. You can't, at some point you're going to experience some things, right? It's not going to be today. We know Peter is, history tells us, or legend, or whatever it is, that he's crucified upside down. I'm not sure exactly how to say that. So he knows that they're going to experience some things someday. But right now, they can't do it. And so to a point, he recognizes that in his humanity, that they're not going to be there, and he knows they're going to scatter. His one saving grace, so to speak, is knowing that God is there with him the whole time. As you said earlier, the angel comes to him. This idea that this fellowship he's looking for in our notes, Doug, as we go through, that he desired to share his heart with his friends and his Father. Certainly the amount of time he spends in the garden gives him the opportunity to do that.
It does. It does. And one of the things that I love about this, Doug, and I'll let you talk about it some too, but finally there's just resignation. Let thy will be done.
Yeah.
That is just resignation. It is resignation to the will of God. And I think it calls upon us for resignation and submission to the will of God in this world, because I really believe that perfect peace can be found only in perfect resignation. It's only when we come to the conclusion that I remember experiencing this at times in my life where I was up against a wall, and it was finally when I was able to say to God, God, I can't fix this. This is yours. And I'm going to tell you that resignation to his will took away a whole lot of discomfort that I felt, a whole lot of stress that I felt. God, this is up to you. And I think peace comes, perfect peace comes for sure, when there is perfect resignation to the will of God.
Yeah, I have to resign myself to the fact that this is what God's desire and God's plan is for me. And if it's God's desire and God's plan for me, we'll talk about this in a little bit, then it's got to be for my good. It's got to be in some way, shape, or form. It's got to be for my good. Jesus went to the cross for the joy that was set before him, the Hebrew writer said. There was some good. It was for the redemption of all humanity. That's what he lived for. That was the good that was going to be accomplished. This is what it was all about. It was going to bring great good. And sometimes that's the case, that we have to be resolved and resigned to that this is where I'm headed. This is what's going to take place. And sometimes the sooner I can get my mindset there, the better off that I am. But we see in Jesus a couple things that we want to make note of. We want to make note of the fact that he brought friends in on this. And folks, if you're struggling with something right now, you need your brothers and sisters in Christ. You need to bring them in on it. You need to be able to pour your heart out to them. They may not understand every time. These guys didn't understand, but that didn't mean he didn't need them.
No.
He needed to share with them. He needed to tell them. He needed them there.
Yeah.
And you know, people let you down. Things happen and all of that. And we understand that. But we need people in our lives. Jesus needed them. Jesus needed conversation with the Father. You can't miss this. Jesus is doing these things for a reason. This is an example for us. You've got to pour your heart out to your Heavenly Father when you're going through your Gethsemane. And if you don't do that, you're going to lose. You're going to miss out. I'm telling you, he won in the garden. That's where this battle was won.
That's right. That's right.
And so as we follow this, we've got to, and then you get others to watch and pray for you. Remember what he told his disciples. He said to them, watch and pray. You know, not only are you wanting to bring these in and share your problems with them, but Bill, you want to get them invested in it and you want them to pray for you.
Yeah, you do. And one of the reasons you really want that is ultimately we don't know where God's going with this. I mean, you know, so many times when I'm going through things, I think of the outcome I want. I even pray for that outcome. Here's what I want God to do. Here's what I think's best. I pray that way for other people. Here's what we want you to do, God. We want you to whatever it may be. What I don't realize often is that, and this is where Peter, James, and John were, and I love what Mark or Luke says about this when he found them sleeping from sorrow. It wasn't just that they were tired.
Yeah.
They were emotionally drained. They couldn't believe what was going on.
Right.
His betrayal is only moments away, and Peter's going to respond to that in a bloody way.
That's right.
And Jesus is going to call him down, because here again, Peter is wanting his will.
That's right.
Not the Father's will. And so one of the passages in the New Testament that I really love, and I'll throw this out there, and I know we're running out of time here, but 1 Corinthians 2:7-10 says this. Paul said, but we speak the wisdom of God in a mystery, the hidden wisdom which God ordained before the ages for our glory. He says, which none of the rulers of this age knew, for had they known, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. They didn't know what he was going to do. They had no idea that the death of Jesus, despite the fact that the Old Testament predicted it, despite the fact that he talked about it, they had no idea that the death was, in fact, God's plan. And then he goes on to quote from Isaiah, which I love. He says, "But as it is written, eye has not seen nor ear heard, nor have entered into the heart of man the things which God has prepared for those who love him." They had no idea what God was doing, Doug. They had no idea what it meant to us. They had no idea the glory that the gospel would bring to the world, that the death and resurrection of Jesus was going to be the heart and soul of everything that he was going to do. And Peter, James, and John, and the others 8 who were standing back because Judas is out doing his thing.
That's right.
None of them knew. Jesus told them. But how do you wrap your minds around the fact that this man that you have loved and walked with for 3 years is destined by God to die? That's the struggle they had.
They did, and they wrestled with it to the point that the sorrow, and they just so wore out, they went to sleep.
Yeah.
It
wasn't because they didn't care.
No, they cared and they loved him, but they just, and that's why he says what he says to them. He says, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. And I believe not only would he be saying that for them, but might he be saying it about himself as well.
Yeah.
You know, my flesh is what is weak here. You know, I'm having to battle the reality of being in this body, that I'm in flesh. And in some ways, we are prisoners to our flesh.
Yes.
We're born again. We're brand new people as Christians, but we're still in this fleshly body.
That's right.
So we still have the fleshly desires that come with this body.
Yeah.
That's why he's our merciful high priest.
Yeah.
Because he knows what it's like to be tempted in all points just as we.
Yeah. I love what Paul says about this when he says that the flesh lusts against the spirit and the spirit lusts against the flesh.
That's right.
And so you have this battle that is going on. Man, if my spirit was all there was, my spirit's tough.
That's right.
But you get to my flesh, and that's a whole different story.
Yeah, I got to say, you know, one of the things that just brings us back to really is the real importance of us understanding why it's so important for us to have this scripture, for us to be able to look at that. As Barclay said, it may seem uncomfortable, and it is, and for a reason. Yeah. It needs to be uncomfortable, but it also needs to be a place in which we can rest and know that the person who has given his life for us, the person who went to the cross on our behalf, understands all of these difficult, what we consider terribly difficult challenges in our life, and how this flesh reacts to them. Yeah. How else would we be able to relate to him apart from that? And I appreciate, so much. I keep coming back to this, but I appreciate so much, Bill, your wrestle over the humanity of Christ, because his divinity, he has the ability to not have to experience any of this, should he desire to. I mean, why would anybody want to put them? So I wouldn't want to put myself through anything that's difficult, which is why I look the way I do. I don't want to go to the gym, right? I mean, but those are realities. There are certain things we want to do. I was just watching, actually, Hayden Pryka had a little thing on Facebook that he went out running, and he basically said, I just hate running. Yeah. So I'm asking you, what do you do to motivate yourself to want to run? Yeah. Maybe you just have to push through it. I don't know. Yeah. But there are things we don't really want to do, Doug, that we do because they're the right things to do. And here, this is just a picture of how we can do
you
that.
Bring us really, Keith, to the last point that we want to talk about in this, and that is that Jesus desired to do the Father's will more than his own will. And I don't want you to misinterpret this. Jesus is always about the Father's will. His desire is to do the Father's will. But he says in this, not my will, but thine be done. That really has to become, it's escaping me, our banner. It has to become our motto. It has to become for us, Bill, as children of God, not my will, but God's will, really has to become the way we live.
Yeah, I think it does. I love something that Mark adds here, and Mark in the video pointed this out. Mark has him saying, Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. I think that's incredible. Because in every other version, he's saying, God, if it be possible.
Right.
But Mark says all things are possible
It is
for you.
absolutely possible.
And all things are possible for God. Could he have stopped this? Yes, but are we glad that he didn't do that? I'm going to tell you, Doug, our motivation to do right cannot come from heaven or the idea of heaven or the hope of heaven. It cannot come from the idea of hell or not wanting to go to hell. It really has to come from the idea that we serve a God who is so loving and caring and good to us that in every situation in my life, I want to do what he wants me to do. Yeah. I mean, that kind of motivation has to be there for us. We have to see a loving God who is willing to do anything for us. And I think that's what Jesus saw when those angels came and ministered to him. I think it's exactly what he saw. He saw his God, his Father, taking care of him. And that's the God we serve.
Yeah. So here's the bottom line in what you just said. If all things are possible to God, and they are, if all things are possible, if that is true, then for some reason, God is choosing not to change the situation.
That's right.
So whatever situation I'm in right now, if God has the power to change it, and he does, and he's not, then he's not for a reason. And I have to find comfort in that.
Yes.
Because remember, I believe God is working things out for good for those that love him.
Yes.
And so I'm looking at this and I'm saying, here's a spiritual principle that I need to live by. That all things are possible for God. Therefore, if he's not changing the system, the situation, the problem, if he's not changing it, then he wants it to happen. He knows it is for my best. This is something that is needed to fulfill a bigger picture. See, that's the part of it that we get lost in, that we see so tunnel visioned. God sees the whole thing. It's more than just this event. It's other events that are going to happen because of it. The salvation of humanity is at stake. It's not just whether, all of these horrible things are going to happen to his son, but all of these horrible things are going to happen to all of his children if he doesn't do it. And so God is able to see the bigger picture, the better picture. He's able to see what's more important. And the other thing is, God heard his prayer. We just read from the Hebrew writer that he heard his prayer.
Yes.
And Bill, here's what the answer was. My son, drink the cup.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Here's where relief comes.
That's right.
Drink the cup. When you drink the cup, you'll be fine. It'll work. It will go. I'm with you. I haven't left you. Yeah. But you gotta drink the cup.
Yeah, when he came back that night after praying that third time and his disciples again were asleep, he came back at peace, calm, ready to face the future, and then he tells them, my betrayer is here. Yeah. He's resigned. Yeah. And I'm telling you that submission to God helps you to face that kind of resignation, that what God's going to do is going to always be right.
Yeah, you see, and as you read on through Matthew, and especially in the Gospel of John, you see Jesus is in control. Not the mob, not the people, not Judas, not the ones who... Jesus is in control.
Yes.
When they come to him and he says, who are you looking for in the Gospel of John? And they say, Jesus. He says, well, I'm he. They fall to their knees. They're terrified of him. There's probably 300 to 600 soldiers with them. Some of the counts that they've given of the people who would have been in that garden at that time. They're terrified of Jesus. They don't know what he's going to... This man has raised Lazarus from the dead. He's done all kinds of things. Just a week earlier, they wanted to make him king.
That's right. That's right.
They don't know what this guy's capable of. They don't know
right.
what he's going to do. Jesus is in charge. Peter grabs his sword and cuts off a man's ear. And Jesus is like, what are you doing? He who takes up the sword will die by the sword. He reaches over, gets that man's ear, puts it back on, or heals him, however he does it. Who's in charge? Jesus is in charge. He's always in charge. And now the battle has been won.
That's right.
It's been won because he drank the cup. He said, if this suffering will only pass unless I drink the cup,
Yep.
your will be done.
He is now resolute.
It's so powerful. Keith, any thoughts as we start to wind down here? What a study.
Yeah, I don't have anything super specific, to be quite honest with you. I think that it's just the reality that that everything does happen for a reason, and that God takes those things which are meant to be evil, and He turns them into things that can be good, that are good. And oftentimes, I think to some of your point, Doug, we're not looking for that. Mm-hmm. We are praying with an end in mind.
Yes.
We're not looking at what God is trying to teach me through it. We're trying to figure out how I can get through it with the least amount of pain and the least amount of difficulty.
That's right.
And imposition on what I believe my life should be like. I have just a quick story, but I have my boss. He was asked to lead the prayer that we do every morning. It's like a 5-minute prayer, and he's not very comfortable doing that. But let me tell you, like everything else in life, you get on the bike and you ride the bike and you'll get through it. And he did an incredible job. He really did, for somebody who's just not comfortable in that skin. And he did a great job because he was doing God's will. God said, no, I'm not going to let you get out of that easy. I know you tried to, but no, I want you to do it because it's important to me that you learn to trust in me. And we're all going through that right now in various ways, with this pandemic and with other things going on, and the challenges that are probably occurring at home because we're all on each other's nerves because we're next to each other way more often than we normally are. But God's put us there for a reason. He's trying to get us to slow down for a reason, and we just gotta figure out what that is for each of us. I don't want to make it a blanket statement. I just think He's got a reason for each of us.
Yeah. As we start to wrap up tonight, I want to also encourage you, always go to our website. It's changing all the time, ccbg.life. You're going to find updates on everything we're doing, including this Bible study that we do on Wednesday nights. Bill, was there something you was going to?
No.
Okay. And we want you to join us this Sunday. It's Easter Sunday, and we're going to have communion service. Pastor Bill will be leading us in that communion service. We'll have a sermon. We'll have everything that we normally have, praise, worship, all of that. This Easter Sunday, we'll just have to do it all live streaming. And so we want you to prepare for that. We want you to either you can go onto the Facebook page. You can make bread with Angel. She made bread this past week with Jackson. Little Action Jackson was there with her, and they did a great job, and it was so fun, and what a blessing to watch them do that. But we're going to have communion this Sunday. On Easter Sunday, the service is at 10 a.m. We want you to be a part of that. And remember to always go to ccbg.life. If you're listening to us and you're not part of Christ Church, you can still go to our website. We want to interact with you. We want to talk with you. If you've got a Bible question, email us with that Bible question. If you're in need of prayer and you've got prayer requests, let us know those prayer requests. There's a form that you can fill out at our website. If you're in need, whether it's food or whatever, you can let us know. We'll do our best to try to help out. We know these are difficult times. These are strange times as we're dealing with this coronavirus. We pray that you're safe. We pray that your family's doing well. But if there's something going on and you need our help, let us know. We want to be here for you. ccbg.life. I want to end, guys, with a poem I wrote. And after Mark sent me his video, this poem just kind of came to life for me. And over the last couple of days, I put it together. But it's a poem about Jesus in the garden. And I've entitled it, Come to the Garden. Now, I'm not a poet, and this poem may show it that I'm not a poet, but I wanted to share it with you nonetheless, entitled, Come to the Garden. Jesus, man of prayer, come to the garden if you dare. Jesus, the Son of Man, who alone must stand, and stand he will, submitted to the Father, save but one appeal, that if he may, yea, if he might, allow this cup to pass from sight. Still in his plea, continued anguish and suffering for all to see, yet not one clue, not even a hint, that to the Father he was not content. For to this hour he had come, a willing sacrifice was this one, a crown of thorns lie in wait, an old rugged cross must be his fate. Given strength from above, moved by the power of his love, he prayed and prayed, yet never swayed, committed but to the Father and his Father's way. He loved him to the end, more than all the fray. He loved us to the end, more than words can say. Oh, come to the garden. Yes, come to the garden if you dare. Please come to the garden, Jesus, man of prayer.
Amen.
That's it for us tonight. We'll be back next Wednesday. God bless.
God bless. Have a great night.